Hey guys, UG here, and today I'm going to be talking about the best comps to play as Ret Paladin. The way I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to have a few different tiers for comps like S, A, B. These ranks are going to be based on comparing Ret comps to each other, not Ret comps to other top tier comps. So an S tier comp for Ret won't be an S tier comp overall, except for Ret Warrior. But these are just ranking comps that you can do the best with as Ret, like kind of just in order. Also, for the S and A tier comps, I'll give a slight overview on how to play them also. I'm going to be doing this through just like a tier list thing. I'm going to be just talking about the classes in general, not the individual specs, unless it's like a completely different spec, like Alien Enhance. So for example, I'm going to be throwing all Hunter specs together, all Warlock specs together, all Warrior specs together, just to kind of make things easier. But to start things off, we have S tier. And at the top of that, it's going to be pretty obvious. It's Ret Warrior. It's been a top tier comp the entire X-Pack, and this season, even after all of the nerfs, it's still an amazing comp. This season you can play with either Arms or Fury. I'm not really sure what's the best at the moment, but both definitely can work. As for healers, you can pretty much do well with any healer, but the ones that are going to be the best are going to be Arshaman, Archer, and H-Priest. Mischief can also be really good, I just personally haven't tried it. Offensively, your strat is pretty simple. Hodge kill target and Stormbolt healer, or the most disruptive DPS. You can also get extended CC combos depending on your healer. Archer can clone out of Bolt, Arshaman can hex off Bolt, H-Priest can chastise the third DPS, and Fear off with Stormbolt if possible. Warrior Fear is pretty situational most of the times. It's usually better off using it defensively, since you can often peel both DPS at the same time, and you don't really need it for your go. As for defensively, this season's changed a lot with our healing nerf and the Warrior distance nerf. From your PvP, all you really need to do is kite when they're pressing buttons and off heal, and then use your big buttons like sack and bop and sank when necessary. It's pretty simple. Most of the more disruptive things are done by the Warrior, things like disarm and duel. When playing this comp, you'll usually want to be something like Luminescence just for the increased damage, but against super mobile teams or double casters, you'll probably want to run Unbound Freedom, since it gives you the undispellable freedom and it also freedoms your Warrior, which is really nice. Divine Purse plus Sanctified Wrath is really good since it gives you more potential off heals and also good cleave whenever you're using Holy Power, and it also extends your goes. Against most double melee teams, you can pretty easily compete with the damage full on, while just being wary of their big goes. Against most setup teams, it's mainly about being as disruptive as possible, sinking important CCs, warrior peeling them, and again sometimes trying to get a good spell with Judgment of the Pure. Against casters it varies, but for the most part, you just want to do big dam until they pop their cooldowns, and when they do, just leave. Even if you still have cooldowns up, most of the time it isn't worth just being out there taking damage. And that is it for Ret Warrior. Next up, we have Ret Hunter. Now, Ret Hunter has always been pretty decent, and with the Warrior nerfs, it feels way better than it did before. You can play with pretty much any Hunter spec, but I'd say BM is probably the best. As for healers, you want to play with an H-Priest, an Archer, and Arshaman, all of them work. Your general go is to trap the healer, stun a kill target. Pretty simple. The most important thing though is consistent landing traps on healers. It's more important than getting consistent cross CC. So a lot of the times you're going to end up having to Hodge as well if you're playing without a healer that has a CC, since Hunters only have Intimidation like every minute, I think. So it's kind of hard for them to consistently trap on their own against certain healers. The comp is a lot more hit and run than Ret Warrior, since for the most part you aren't going to be going for kills outside of your go. Against melee cleaves, your main goal is just, stay alive, off heal, use freedoms, whatever you have to do. Against double casters, your main goal is just to try to go in, force as many cooldowns as possible, and then bail. The Hunter can kind of just, poke out every once in a while to get some consistent damage, but if you get trapped out against double caster, you're kind of screwed. Against other setup comps, you can be way more aggressive most of the time, since you tend to do more consistent damage than them, but you just need to be really aware of when they're trying to go for their go and how to try to stop it. This comp does have a way better matchup into things like RMX, since you have the ranged kick from Hunter and also Roar of Sacrifice, which shuts down a lot of the mage pressure. And Hunters also kind of just shred mages, so mage is definitely a kill target when playing against rogue mage. And that's about it for Ret Hunter. So now we're going to go down to the A tier comps, and the first comp I'm going to be talking about is Ret DK. So it's usually best run with a Frost DK, and also usually with a Kyrian Ret. I haven't tried Necro Ret, but it could also be decent, since you can do a more consistent like mini go with every grip Hodge. For healers, you're going to want to go with Mistweaver, H-Priest, or Arsham. Mistweaver can be really good because it's kind of like you have a Windwalker. For Windwalker DK, you do the Grip Leg Sweep go. The other ones are also good. Arsham's really good with Sky Fury Totem and Dwayne, and H-Priest is just the best healer in the game. It's kind of it. Your main goal is just to do massive damage during Grip Hodge. Your main go is every minute with a combination of your damage and DK damage. The comp has some really good pressure during goes, but outside of it, it struggles a bit. Melee cleaves are especially hard since both of you usually need some type of assistance to survive against them, and neither of you really provide that for each other. It does do decent into double caster teams, since DKs are pretty tanky against them, and they also have AMZ and Grip to disrupt their goes. Against most setup comps, you're pretty screwed. You don't really have a lot of disruption, and the utility you bring usually isn't enough to consistently survive them. It's still pretty strong, and you can get pretty high with it, but it may take dodging certain Qs to actually push super duper high. Next up, we have Ret Shadow Priest. So I personally think this comp is secretly insane, especially with Ret being Necro now. You have the ability to get a kill every single Hodge. You absolutely destroy healers with this comp, and you have a decent amount of setup. The only big problem is you really don't have a good way to keep your priest alive for melee cleaves. All you can really do is bop every, 3 or 5 minutes, freedom them, and give them off heals. You don't really have a consistent slow to peel also, so it's kind of rough. Setup comps are really easy to play against though, since you have MD, Sank, Sack, Bop, Swap, and Judge's Spell to help each other out. It's just really good. I think this comp is really insane into Rogue Mage also. But as for healers you want to play with, Arsham's good, Ardruid's good. Those are probably the two best. H-Priest can work just because, you know, H-Priest is broken, and Mistweaver is also pretty good. Last up for A tier, we're going to have Ret Rogue. Now, I think this comp is amazing. I think you can get rank 1 with this comp if you play it really well. I'm kind of just surprised that no one's really done it yet. Now, as for rogue specs, I think all 3 are good. Though I haven't really played with sub too much, I can see how good it could be. Asa feels the worst in my opinion, but that may be different this season because of how good they get with their set bonus. The problem is it just kind of ends up feeling like a really squishy melee cleave. You don't really have a ton of CC or survivability, but I think if played well, you can probably push pretty high with it. And maybe I'm dumb, maybe it's actually just insane. Weirdly enough though, I think Outlaw is kind of insane for this comp. It has a ton of control, and it feels really strong. It also does pretty good consistent damage and can survive for a surprisingly long time on its own against melee cleaves. Along with the ability to go 1 minute blind, you can do some pretty nasty goes. Your general go is going to be use Rogue Stun on kill target, then you either Hodge the healer or the Rogue blinds the healer, and then the Rogue uses Cheap Shot or Gouge on the other DPS. So it's kind of just Rogue doing a lot, but if you can't kill, and then if you don't manage to kill the kill target in the kidney and maybe the enemy healer trinkets, you still have Hodge, so that you can Hodge to the healer and make a big swap onto them and do a big go. Some things that you can run is Blinding Light, since if you're playing with sub, they can pretty consistently sap off of it, I'm pretty sure. So that can be really good. As for your matchups, you do pretty well into almost everything. The only things you have a lot of trouble with are the things that do insane amounts of damage, things like Ret Warrior, DH Boomy, TSG and Turbo are also kind of tough. Just melee cleaves in general are a bit rough, but you can beat some of them if you play really well. And then healers that are good for it are H-Priest, Ardruid, Arsham, you know, same shit. Those are kind of just the best healers in the game right now, so play with them. And now we have the B tier. I'm just going to be kind of mentioning what the comp is and what it does really quick. These comps, they're not as good as the other ones, but you can do just as fine with them. I think you could probably push really high with any of these comps. So the first one is gonna be Ret DH. It does a shit ton of damage. That's about it. Also, DH provides some pretty good utility to keep yourself alive and they don't die. Next up is Ret Lock. Does a shit ton of damage. And it kind of just frees you up to play however you want, because if they're doing a ton of damage, you have the lock to perma peel you. If they're doing the locks don't really die too easily, and you can also help them out with freedoms and sanks and things like that. Just really good. And then the last one for B tier is Ret Windwalker. you just have really crazy burst goes and you have really good consistent damage and you can set up things pretty easily. And now for C tier, we are going to have Ret Boomy. It does pretty good burst. Curing Boomy can be really nuts with Ret Paladin, and you can do some pretty crazy goes with Beam. Next is Ret Ellie. It's kind of the same as Ret Boomy. You can do some really crazy burst goes, and Lasso is pretty nice. And then lastly is Ret Mage. It's kind of just Cutthroat Hunter. The only good thing is they can set up their own CC way easier than a Hunter can, since they can just DB sheep. But overall, it's not the best. And yeah, that's it. Those are the best comps for Ret Paladin. You can honestly do well with any of these comps. Ret is kind of just one of those classes where you can kind of pull off playing with anything and do pretty decently. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.